On our 50th wedding anniversary, I waited in the garden alone, holding 2 slices of carrot cake, one for me, one for him. The table was set for 5, just in case. No one came. I'm Helen Parrish, 72, and that was the moment I knew I wasn't just being forgotten. I was being erased. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I suppose I should have known. The signs were never loud, just scattered like dust. Things forgotten, calls delayed, voices that turned warm only when they needed something. But that day was different. That day was surgical. I wore the blue dress I hadn't touched in 6 years, the one with the little pearl buttons he used to compliment when his eyesight was better. I laid out the album from our wedding, yellowed edges, but still intact. I even brought out the old music box David gave me on our 20th, the one that played Moon River. It was the only time I ever saw him cry, quiet and embarrassed. But this time, the only thing that filled the room was the hum of the refrigerator and the groan of the wind pushing the screen door back and forth. Nobody called, not even the grandchildren, not even my son, just a group text, not even addressed to me, directly reminding everyone about Amanda's birthday brunch the next day. My daughter-in-law's third cousin or something. Somehow, she made the list. I didn't. I sat there, the lace tablecloth catching the breeze, pretending that maybe they were stuck in traffic. Maybe they got the date wrong. Maybe anything but the truth that I was no longer part of their center. I lit the candles anyway, 5 of them, one for each decade of marriage. I let them burn low before I finally blew them out with a quiet, invisible wish. And in that soft gust of breath, I realized something. No one was coming. And it wasn't just about that day. It was about all the days before it, and all the ones after. You see, I wasn't just mourning an empty garden party. I was mourning the slow disappearance of myself from the lives I helped build. Like watching a house you poured yourself into, being sold without your name on the deed. Like realizing you've become the guest in a story you used to write. I walked back inside, shut the album, and turned off the music box. And I knew in the quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace but abandonment, that something had shifted, not just in them, but in me. People always say you get used to being alone, that you find hobbies, routines, maybe a pet. But nobody talks about the first time you realize you've been alone for years, even in a full house, that your opinions were just pauses between their sentences, that your kindness had been quietly budgeted as a resource, not a bond. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea. I looked at the photo on the mantel, one where David and I are cutting into that absurdly tall wedding cake, frosting on his nose, my eyes still soft with dreams. I touched the frame gently, then turned it down flat. It wasn't grief anymore. It was clear, and clarity, though quiet, is sharp. They say love is patient and kind, but I've learned love is also memory. And when they stop remembering your anniversaries, your sacrifices, your voice, that's a kind of death no one grieves. So, I lit another candle that night. Just one, not for celebration, for mourning. Mourning a woman. I used to be the matriarch, the giver, the planner. The glue. She was gone. And in her place stood someone they no longer feared losing. But that, I decided, was their mistake. Because the thing about erasing someone is that eventually they stop trying to be seen. They learn to look elsewhere. They learn to begin. And that's what I did quietly, deliberately. But that story comes next. When I was 32, I used to make cinnamon rolls from scratch every Sunday morning. I'd get up before the sun, warm the yeast, knead the dough with floured hands, and leave the tray near the window to rise. David said the smell reminded him of his mother's kitchen, and that was all the reason I needed to keep doing it. Even when the kids got older and stopped waking up early, I still made them. I thought maybe the scent would pull them downstairs, like a soft thread back to me. Sometimes it did. Often it didn't. But I kept baking. That's how love worked. For me, repetition without applause. I didn't need to be thanked. That's not what I'm saying. But when you go years giving, always giving, and the room forgets you were the one who kept the lights on, the bills paid, the birthdays remembered, it wears you down like a slow leak under the floorboards. At first you don't notice. Then one day you step wrong, and your foot goes right through. I remember my daughter Olivia's first dance recital. She had stage fright so badly she threw up in the back seat on the way there. I cleaned her dress, in the car with a bottle of water and a church bulletin. I told her it made the pink satin look even prettier. She smiled, blinked back tears, and performed like she'd never been scared. No one remembered that part, just the ribbon she brought home. Or my son Aaron is always the quiet one. When he didn't make the baseball team, he locked himself in his room for 2 days. David said to let him be, but I made a plate of grilled cheese the way he liked it, cut diagonally, not straight. I sat outside his door and hummed the lullaby I used to sing when he was little. He opened the door by the second night. That's all it took, a mother's patience. A small kindness, but those memories live in me alone. I don't think they remember them, not really, not in the way that counts. I worked nights at the community clinic when David got laid off in '89. Told the kids I liked the night shift because the patients were calmer, but the truth was, we needed the insurance. I'd come home just before dawn, sneak into bed before the alarm went off, and pretend I'd been there all night. I didn't want them to worry. I didn't want David to feel small. Every Christmas, I stitched one new ornament for the tree, something personal. A tiny mailbox when Aaron got his first job at the post office. A ballet slipper for Olivia when she choreographed her first show. A little book the year David finally finished his novel, though he never let anyone read it. He said it was just for him. I never told him I found it once in the garage, wrapped in plastic, pages soft with water damage. I read every word. Love is in the things we never bring up, even in the hard years, and there were many. I kept going, kept ironing shirts, learning their favorite meals, saving the last piece of pie even when I hadn't had dinner. I helped Olivia through her divorce, even though she married a man I begged her not to. I held her as she cried, and never once said, "I told you so." I just made her tea and let her sleep in her old room. And when Aaron's wife Amanda had that scare during her second pregnancy, I drove 6 hours in the rain to take care of their firstborn while they stayed in the hospital. I slept on the couch, walked the baby at night, and cooked dinner without being asked. Amanda thanked me with a card. Aaron didn't say much, he never did, but I thought maybe they knew, maybe they saw. It's strange how easily people forget the scaffolding that held their lives together. They remember the parties, and the photos, and the milestones, but they don't remember who cleaned the stains out of their Easter dresses, or who called the teacher after a bad report card, or who stayed up until midnight filling out financial aid forms. They don't remember the hands, just the outcome. I think that's what hurts most. Not that they're busy, not that they have their own families now. That's life. That's expected. But the erasure, the quiet fading of all the little things I did to keep their world spinning, that's the ache that lingers. I didn't raise them to owe me. I raised them to be decent, to be grateful, to notice people. But over time, I became less a person and more a fixture. Like the old rug in the hallway, always there, always stepped on, but never really seen. Until one day they roll it up and give it away, and the floor feels colder without it, but no one remembers why. Sometimes I think maybe I spoiled them, gave too much, held too tightly, made things too easy. That's what the neighbor down the street said once, when she caught me raking Aaron's leaves after he moved out. "Let them miss you," she said. "They can't miss what's always there." I didn't understand what she meant until much later, and now that they don't ask, don't check in, don't remember even the big does, I realize I gave so much of myself that there was nothing left to miss. There's a loneliness that comes from absence, but there's a deeper one that comes from presence without acknowledgement. Being in the room but invisible, being in their lives but not in their hearts. I don't think they meant to do it. That's the thing. They were just living, just moving forward. And I was always so good at being the background. I wonder sometimes if they think I'm fine, that I've adjusted. I have my hobbies, my crossword puzzles, and my books, but they never ask. Not really. They skim the surface, and I let them. Because the truth is, I trained them that way, to believe I was unbreakable, to believe I didn't need to, but I did. I still do. And that Sunday, when I sat with the cake and the candles and the empty chairs, I didn't just feel forgotten. I felt used. That was the part I hadn't admitted until then, that everything I did, every cinnamon roll, every stitched ornament, every drive through a storm, wasn't just out of duty, it was out of love. A deep, raw, unwavering love. And now, I wasn't sure if any of them ever really loved me back in the same way. Not the way that I remember. Not the way that stays. But that's not where this ends. Because there's more to tell about what came next. About the little things that built into something heavier. about the quiet cracks that turned into a split, and about the moment I finally stopped waiting to be remembered and started remembering myself. There are hurts that come in a single blow, the sharp ones you can name, but then there are the others, the kind that builds slowly, like sediment in a river. You don't even notice the weight of it until you try to move, and your legs no longer lift the way they used to. That's how it happened with my family. Not with a scream or a slammed door, just 100 quiet moments, each one a little colder than the last. The first one, I remember clearly, was the Christmas after David passed. It was the first year the house felt too big. I trimmed the tree myself, dragged the boxers up from the basement, and made his favorite fudge even though I was the only one who'd eat it. I called Olivia, told her I'd love to have everyone over. She said they were going to Amanda's parents that year, but next year, for sure. I didn't argue, I just said okay and hung up before the silence on my end started to sound too heavy. Aaron didn't call until Christmas night. A short call. He sounded tired. He always sounds tired now. Said the kids were sick. Said Amanda's aunt came to town. Said. I know life is busy, but I also know what effort looks like. I made an effort for 38 years. They could manage a weekend. That's the thing no one tells you about getting older. It's not just your body that gets stiff. It's the way people begin to handle you like glass. Fragile, irrelevant, in the way. You become something to be visited, scheduled, tolerated, never quite seen. There were birthdays they forgot entirely, not maliciously, just forgot. A voicemail from Olivia 3 days later, a text from Aaron with no punctuation, no warmth. Happy B-Day, Mom, that was it. Not even a call. I used to make treasure hunts for their birthdays. Little notes tucked into cereal boxes and pillowcases, leading to the one gift they really wanted. I would stay up the night before, handwriting clues, tying ribbons. I still remember Olivia's face when she found the puppy in the laundry room. That joy, that light. And now I was an afterthought. If that. Then came the cancellations, the small broken promises. We'll stop by this weekend, we'll have dinner soon. They'd slip out of plans like shirts off hangers. Something always came up. Soccer tournaments, business trips, Amanda's mother needs help, and it was never cruel. That's what made it worse. It was casual. When Olivia moved houses, I offered to help pack. She said she didn't want to bother me. I showed up anyway with bubble wrap and boxes. She smiled, surprised, but there was no real place made for me there. I wrapped plates while Amanda's sister directed the movers. No one asked if I needed a chair. No one asked if I was hungry. I left early that day and cried in the car, parked 2 streets over so no one would see. There were holidays where I was told to just relax this year. They'd handle everything. I wasn't sure when my cooking became obsolete, when my traditions became optional. They made jokes about my overbaked casseroles, my way of folding napkins, and my habit of turning down the thermostat. I laughed, too. That's what you do. You laugh so they don't see the bruise under the rib. And slowly, I stopped offering, stopped inviting. Stopped showing up with warm pies and open arms, because each time I did, I felt a little smaller, like someone flipping through a book they've already read, skipping the pages they know too well. The visits became fewer, shorter, and when they came, they brought their phones. They scrolled, they nodded while I talked. I could feel their attention split in half, sometimes in thirds. I learned to make my stories shorter, less detail, less me. One time I mentioned a new book I was reading, something about grief and aging. Olivia changed the subject before I finished the title. You should try yoga, Mom, she said, pouring herself another coffee. It really helps with stuff. Stuff, I was now a category. Even when I had a health scare, just a small episode, but enough to earn me a night in the ER. And didn't come. He called. He asked questions like he was reading from a form. Amanda texted later, saying she hoped I was feeling better soon. I could hear the kids in the background of the call, screaming, laughing. Life is moving on. They didn't know the nurse had to hold my hand while they adjusted the 4. The beeping of the monitors made me cry because it reminded me of the day David died. They didn't ask who drove me home. They didn't ask if I needed. Grofta started to realize the only time they needed me was when something went wrong, and even then, only if it was convenient. Olivia asked me to watch the kids last minute when her sitter canceled. I said yes, always yes. But when I slipped on the ice walking to my car afterward, they didn't even notice the bruise on my wrist the next week. I kept a journal for a while, A little blue notebook. I wrote down each time I felt invisible. I filled 48 pages in 6 months. One day, I just stopped writing. Not because the hurt ended, but because it became too ordinary to record. Sometimes, I would hold my phone in my hand, wondering if I should call them, just to talk, just to hear their voices. But something would stop me. The memory of that distracted tone. The way they talked over me. I would set the phone down and go fold laundry or water the plants. Pretend the silence didn't ache. I stopped telling them when I had appointments, when I fixed the fence myself, when I got the shingles vaccine. Things I used to mention, hoping they'd ask questions, show interest. But they didn't. So I stopped. I told myself this was just the phase of life. That children grow, get busy, reap. But deep down, I knew. I knew that love doesn't forget your voice. That when someone matters, you remember their stories. That showing up late is one thing, but forgetting to come at all is something else entirely. So when they missed their anniversary, it wasn't the first hurt. It was just the most honest one, the most revealing, the one that peeled the final layer back and said, look, this is what it is. I had given everything I had: time, care, memory, history, and been left with silence. But I didn't shout, I didn't plead. I just began to look at my life differently, and what came next came quietly, like a curtain being drawn open after years of dim light. It didn't start with a scream. It started with a silence so complete, it demanded I finally listen to myself. I used to believe there were lines my children would never cross, not out of fear or obligation, but because they loved me, because I raised them to care, to pause, before hurting someone who handed them the best years of her life. But every line has a final inch. And mine came on a Wednesday afternoon in early March. The sky was gray, the kind that hangs low and presses against your chest. I'd spent the morning sorting through old linens, deciding which ones to donate, which ones to keep. I had a notion of simplifying, of clearing space, not for anyone else, just for me. That's when the letter arrived. Not a letter, really, a packet, thick, official, with my name printed in bold. At first, I thought it was insurance paperwork, or maybe a mistake, but as I opened the pages and saw the header from a real estate attorney, my stomach turned cold. It wasn't a mistake. Aaron had listed my house not in the future, not after discussions, not as a shared plan. It was already in motion, the papers drawn, the appraisal done. My name was there, but only barely, like an accessory to the process, a formality to be swept aside. In small print, buried in the legal language, was a clause referencing power of attorney, signed and filed nearly 4 years ago, after David passed. Back when I was raw and grieving, and trusted them too much to read the fine lines. I remembered, that day, Olivia had sat with me at the kitchen table. She said they just wanted to help, to take some weight off. This just means we can make decisions for you if you're ever unwell, she said. Nothing changes unless you need us to step in. I believed her. I didn't know that one day they'd decide I needed to step in without asking me. The letter said the house was no longer suitable for independent living, that they were prioritizing my safety. A senior community had already been toured, a deposit placed. I read those words again and again, prioritizing my safety. As if I hadn't been navigating these rooms longer than they'd been alive, as if I hadn't painted every wall, patched every creaking step, memorized every sound this house made when it breathed at night. No one called me before they did it. No one sat me down. No one said, "Mom, is this what you want?" They just assumed I'd go quietly, that I'd pack up the photo albums, the recipes, the echoes of my life, and hand over the keys like a tired tenant, grateful to be relieved. But I wasn't tired. I was insulted. I sat on the edge of the couch for a long time, not moving, not crying, just hollow, a hum in my chest, like something sacred had cracked and the sound was still reverberating through me. They didn't see me as capable anymore. That was the truth. Not as someone with opinions or autonomy, just a woman, to be managed, a sentimental inconvenience. And it wasn't just the house. It was what the house represented. My life, my choices, my independence. My memories of David and his laugh are still trapped in the hallway, his shirts still hanging in the back closet, untouched. My garden, where I had buried the dog's ashes and planted rosemary because it reminded me of my mother. All of it, condensed into a transaction they could execute with a few strokes of a pen. I called Aaron that evening. He answered the speaker, his voice clipped, rushed. The kids were yelling in the background. "Mom, did you get the packet? Look, I know it seems sudden, but it's for the best. I hung up before he could finish. I didn't want an explanation. I wanted acknowledgement, but none came. 3 days later, Olivia arrived unannounced. She brought soup. That used to be our language. Soup meant love, but this time, it felt like a bribe. She sat across from me, all soft tones and practiced sympathy. "We just want to make sure you're okay," she said, folding her hands like a nurse. I nodded slowly. That was the moment I knew the decision had already been made. In their eyes, I had already been moved out, boxed up, reassigned. All that remained was my compliance. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled. Because something in me had gone very still. Not dead awake, wide awake. They had drawn a line. And for the first time, I was going to cross back over it. I walked through the house that night in silence, touching the banister David had built, the kitchen counter where I rolled dough every December. I sat on the back steps and let the night air settle in my lungs. I listened to the distant sound of traffic, the rustle of dry leaves on the porch. Everything they called unsuitable felt like home to me. I pulled out the power of attorney, papers from the drawer where I kept all the things I didn't want to think about. I read them this time and really read them. And I realized something. They hadn't stolen my rights. I'd given them away, but only once, and now, I was done giving the. Next morning, I called a lawyer. Not theirs, mine. I didn't tell anyone, not Aaron, not Olivia, not the family group chat that had been oddly quiet since I went silent. I let the process begin in the background, the undoing, the unraveling of what they had quietly tied into a bow without me. I stopped answering calls. I let messages pile up, let them wonder, because this wasn't revenge, it was a reclamation. And it started with a house, but it wouldn't end there. There was a storm coming, not loud, not thunderous, just a slow shift in the wind. A woman reclaiming the space she was told no longer belonged to her. And in that silence, I found the beginning of something else, something they never expected me. Me. I didn't announce my silence. I just let it arrive. Slow and sure, like nightfall in winter. No tantrum, no note on the counter, no passive sighs over dinner. Just stillness, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. After the house papers arrived, and the visit from Olivia with her soup and soft warnings, I stopped filling in the spaces they left behind. I no longer sent reminders about dentist appointments for the grandkids. I didn't ask how Olivia's back was doing, or whether Aaron ever got that promotion he hinted at. The calendar I used to update with birthdays and anniversaries was taken down, not out of spite, but because I realized I was the only one looking at it. I made my morning tea the same way I always had, but I stopped waiting for calls while I drank it. I read the paper cover to cover, not just to stay informed, but to remind myself that the world still existed outside their orbit, that I could belong somewhere else, to something else. I started walking again every morning at 7. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, though a few new families had moved in. A toddler across the street liked to wave from the window when I passed. I waved back. That small exchange meant more to me than the last dozen conversations with my children, because it was offered freely. Inside the house, I began sorting through things, not with urgency, but with clarity. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years, found receipts from David's last fishing trip, notes the kids wrote me when they were small, crayon letters full of "I love you" and crooked hearts. I didn't cry over them. I just held them gently, like something holy. Then I placed them in a cedar box and slid it under my bed. I didn't tell anyone about the lawyer, a woman named Camille Sharpite, soft-spoken. She was recommended by a friend I met in a grief group, though I hadn't attended in over a year. I told Camille everything about the power of attorney, the house, the paperwork I didn't read until too late. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, handed me a pen, and said, "Let's get to work." We filed the revocation within 2 weeks. Clean, legal, final. Still, I said nothing to Aaron or Olivia. Let them swim in their assumptions, in their gentle justifications. I wasn't being cruel. I just no longer felt responsible for managing their comfort. That's the thing about silence. People confuse it with surrender. But mine was different. Mine was discipline. I stopped answering messages that began with "Hey, just checking in." I stopped replying to group threads filled with emojis and updates about soccer games I'd never be invited to watch. I let their birthdays pass without a call. I didn't remind them. I didn't forget. I simply withdrew the part of myself that had once kept everything stitched together. When Olivia sent a follow-up text, "Mom, you okay? Haven't heard from you." I turned the phone over on the table and walked away. I was okay, more okay than I'd been in years, because for once, I wasn't performing the role they wrote for me without asking. I wasn't the background support. I wasn't the safety net. I was just a woman, in her own house, with her own thoughts, rediscovering the sound of her own voice in her own head. I opened an old journal I had stopped writing, in the same one, where I once recorded every time I felt unseen. I turned to a blank page, wrote the date, then I wrote just one word, Beginda. I started setting boundaries that no one knew about. If they wanted to see me, they'd have to knock. If they wanted to understand, they'd have to ask. I wouldn't be explaining myself anymore. That was the first promise I made to myself in silence, that I would no longer narrate my worth for the benefit of people who only listened when they felt guilty. At night, I started reading again. The thick novels I used to avoid because I told myself I didn't have the time. I made stew the slow way, not the quick version that used to fit between errands and drop-offs. I sat by the window and listened to the rain. I didn't fill the space with news or music or noise. I just let the quiet stretch out. And in that quiet, something strange happened. I started remembering who I was before them, before the diaper bags, the packed lunches, the carpools, the hospital visits. Before I became the woman who always had an answer, always had a casserole ready, always said of course. Sweetie, before she even heard the question. I remembered the girl who once dreamed of working in a museum, who loved the smell of old books and believed that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was depth. I remembered how I used to paint with oils, the way I loved that first streak of color on a blank canvas. I hadn't picked up a brush in decades, so I ordered new ones, and canvas and paints, not the cheap kind, the good kind, the kind you only buy when you believe you're worth it. I turned the spare room into a studio, cleared out the boxes of baby clothes and high school trophies. I kept one shelf, just one for photos. The rest I filled with light and possibility, and I began painting. Not landscapes or still life, just color, movement, feeling. It wasn't about art, it was about reclaiming space, about saying, I'm still here. Camille checked in once a week with updates. We went over the trust, revision, asset protections, steps to ensure no one could act on my behalf again, without my written word. I wish more women your age did this, she told me. I smiled. So do I, because too many of us think silence means defeat. But for me, silence became a sanctuary. It gave me room to prepare, to plan, to heal. And what I was preparing for wasn't war. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was a life of my own making. One where my children would have to meet me where I was, or not at all. And as I sat on the porch one evening, watching the light dip behind the trees, I felt no anger, just a quiet understanding that something had ended, but in its place, something else had begun, something that didn't need their permission or their applause. The first thing I did was take the for sale sign out of the lawn myself. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I just walked out one morning in my robe, barefoot on the dewy grass, and pulled it from the ground like a weed that had been growing without my permission. I set it behind the shed. I didn't break it, just place it down gently, like you would a lie that no longer needs repeating. I called Camille that afternoon. I told her I was ready to move forward, but not in the way my children envisioned. Not to the quiet little cottage with full-time staff Olivia once pitched like it was a resort and not a holding pen. Not to the high-rise Erin visited in the city, with a rooftop view and scheduled group activities. No, if I was going to move, it would be by my own design, in my own time, with my name leading every document. But first, I needed to make peace with the house, not out of sentiment, not out of fear, but because I had come to see it for what it was, a place I had filled with love long before it became something they saw as property. I began sorting in earnest, not purging, choosing. Each drawer, each closet, every box in the attic I opened. Slowly, I held the contents like an archivist, not a widow, not a mother. I kept what mattered. I released what I didn't. Old tax forms, baby teeth in pill bottles, dried bouquets from recitals all went. I gave away coats to the shelter, china to the church, books to the library, not because I had no one to hand them down to, but because I no longer needed legacy to feel real. Somewhere in that process, I stopped calling it the house. I started calling it This House, because I knew I wouldn't stay. I wasn't running, I was simply graduating. I called a real estate agent, a woman named Denise. She was kind, listened more than she talked. She didn't use words like downsizing or empty nest. She asked what I was looking for. I said, light, privacy, a place where nothing reminds me of what I gave up. She nodded, wrote it down, word for word. It took 2 months to find it. A small craftsman cottage on the edge of a quiet town I used to drive through with David. In the fall, maple trees that turned gold in October. A wraparound porch. A wide window facing east. I walked through it alone. There was dust on the floorboards, a soft smell of old wood and lavender, a cracked tile in the bathroom, no appliances. In the kitchen, it was perfect, because it was mine. Mine to restore, mine to reinvent. I made an offer on the spot. Denise looked surprised. No family coming to see it with you? She asked. No, I said simply, just me. The papers were signed within a week. Camille helped expedite the sale of the house, the real one, the one I had raised them in. I didn't tell anyone. Until it was done, I left a letter on the kitchen counter for Aaron and Olivia. Not to be cruel, just because I knew they'd come looking eventually. It wasn't long. 2 weeks after the moving truck pulled away, Aaron showed up with Amanda. I watched them through the doorbell camera, pacing the porch, trying to call me. I didn't answer. My silence wasn't meant to hurt them. It was meant to protect me, because for once, I wasn't going to be explained out of my own decision. I wasn't going to listen to their worried tones, their carefully arranged concern, their puzzled faces asking, why didn't you talk to us first? They knew why. They just didn't want to sit with the answer. The cottage was nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a creaky floor in the hallway, and a fireplace that needed repair. But it had something the big house had long since lost: peace. I filled it slowly, not with things, but with presence. A kettle that whistled, not beeped. Curtains I hemmed by hand. A rocking chair I found at a second-hand store that reminded me of the one my mother used to sit in. I planted lavender along the walkway, rosemary by the back fence. I painted the front door blue, the same shade as the dress I wore on my anniversary. Inside, I kept space. I didn't fill every wall with photos. I hung one black and white picture of me and David in our 20s, standing in front of our first apartment. I kept a journal by the bedside, and each night, I wrote one sentence. Not about them, about me. What I noticed, what I felt, what I hoped. One night, I wrote, I belong to myself now. It felt like the truth. Olivia tried to reach out a few times. A card in the mail, a voicemail, stiff with formality. Just wanted to check in. Mom, hope you're well. The kids miss you. I didn't reply, not out of punishment, but because I needed time. Time without their noise, their explanations, their guilt. Time to hear myself again. I walked into town one morning and signed up for a class at the local community center. Painting on Tuesdays. I brought my own brushes. The woman next to me, Ruth, was 71, sharp as a tack, with hair dyed the color of a red apple. We talked about color palettes, arthritis, and our favorite soups. She didn't ask about my children. I didn't ask about hers. It was refreshing. I started going to the farmer's market. I learned the names of the vendors. I bought honey from a woman named Selma who sold it in jars with handwritten labels. I drank coffee on my porch and waved to the mailman. Slowly, I was building a life, not replacing what I had, but choosing what I wanted now. It didn't look like anyone else's, and that was the point. I hadn't set out to prove anything. Not to Aaron, not to Olivia, not to the world. I just needed to remember that my story hadn't ended when they stopped listening. It had only paused now. It was moving again at fast, not loud but steady, like the tide, like breath. And in this quiet, I learned something I had forgotten, that freedom is not always about escape. Sometimes it's just the simple act of living as if your name matters, even when no one is watching. They didn't notice it all at once. It came to them in fragments, like puzzle pieces scattered too far to fit. At first, I think they just assumed I was sulking, that I was playing a part, the wounded matriarch, waiting to be chased and coaxed back into the family fold. But I wasn't waiting. I wasn't hiding. I had simply left, not with luggage or accusation, but with quiet, the kind that unsettles when it lingers too long. Aaron sent an email 3 weeks after the sale of the house went through, short, almost clinical. Hey Mom, got the update from the county records. Just wanted to check if you're okay. Let us know where you landed, where I landed. As if I had fallen. As if I hadn't leaped. I didn't respond, and for the first time, I think it occurred to him that I might not, that I might really be gone in the way people never expect their mothers to be. Not buried, not moved away, just inevitable. There is a certain economy to a mother's presence. Even when we're not called, we are counted. Even when we're ignored, we are expected to remain, and when we vanish, even gently, even legally, there's a strange ripple in the fabric of a family. I felt that the ripple reached them from afar. They started texting more often, just checking in. Hope you're well. The kids miss you. But it wasn't just me they were missing. It was the way I filled the cracks in their lives without being asked. The way I remembered birthdays and bridged silences. The way I picked up slack when Amanda had postpartum and Olivia's son struggled in school. The way I filled stockings in gas tanks and fridges. The way I showed up not for credit, but because I could. Without me, they had to remember things on their own. They had to be the glue they always assumed would be there, even after it stopped sticking. I heard through a neighborkind woman, still friendly, that Aaron and Amanda had been arguing more. Nothing dramatic, just strained. The kind of strain that happens when one thread in the system is pulled and everything starts unraveling in small, unseen ways. I imagined their mornings. No warm muffins on snow days. No undropped-off soup when the kids were sick. No extra set of hands during pickup and drop-off, or someone to sit in the stands when work ran late. I imagined Olivia walking into the kitchen one Sunday and realizing no one had reminded her to call her brother for his birthday. No one had mailed cards or wrapped last-minute gifts. No one had frozen her favorite lasagna for the weeks. She felt too tired to cook. It's funny how absence teaches people what presence really meant. They didn't say it, of course, they wouldn't, but I saw it in the shift of their tone. In the voicemails that started to sound less routine and more hesitant. In the texts that came with photos of the grandkids, of their houses, of holidays like little peace offerings. One Sunday morning, Olivia left a message. Her voice cracked midway through. I just don't know, Mom. I guess I thought you'd always be there, and I know we made choices without thinking. But we didn't mean to push you out. We were just trying to help. We didn't realize you weren't asking for help. That was the closest thing to an apology I ever got, and even that was wrapped in justification. I didn't need their guilt. What I needed was what I had found: stillness, autonomy, a life that didn't revolve around being everyone else's gravity. But still, I felt the ache in them. Not for me, not yet fully, but for what they lost with me. The dinners I would have hosted, the quiet comfort I gave without fanfare. The certainty that someone knew how to make the family feel like a family. Now, Olivia had to fill that role, and I think it scared her, because she had spent so long walking in my warmth that she never learned how to make her own. Aaron wrote me a longer letter eventually, handwritten, messy, like he hadn't held a pen in years. He said he'd been going through some of Dad's old notebooks, that he never knew how many notes David had kept, grocery lists, phone numbers, little scribbles like "Remember Helen's favorite flowers are peonies." He said reading those made him think, maybe we didn't ask enough questions. He wrote, maybe we forgot you had your own pages. It was the first time I heard my son speak of me as a person and not a role. I didn't write back, but I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. Not out of sentiment, out of evidence. Proof that my absence had weight, that my silence had shape, that without me, the house of cards they'd built on convenience wobbled a little in the wind. I heard through Camelwood, grown into something like a friend. Thought the senior home Olivia had toured was no longer holding my spot. They called her to confirm, and she told them I'd gone another way. I don't know where, she'd said. She won't tell us. There was a time when that would have broken me. The thought of my children confused, worried, left out. But now, it simply felt fair. They'd made choices without me. Now they were living the result, and I was watching not with bitterness, but with clarity. They had lost something irreplaceable. Not because I was gone, but because they hadn't noticed I was leaving, because they assumed I'd never stop holding the door open, even as they walked past me, every time, without looking back. Now, they stood in front of that closed door, knocking, and hearing nothing but their own hands. I hadn't meant to write it, it just arrived, One quiet evening in early autumn, while the windows were open and the smell of pine drifted in from the trees behind the cottage, I was folding laundry towels still warm from the dryer when the thought landed in my chest, heavy and certain. You need to say it. Not to them, to yourself. I left the towels half folded and walked to the little writing desk by the window, pulled out a single sheet of paper and the good pen David once gave me for our 30th anniversary, a simple thing, black ink, brass tip. I had hardly used it, and I began, "Dear Helen." I paused after the greeting. The strangeness of writing to myself made my hands still for a moment, but then it felt right, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't speaking as a mother or a wife or a placeholder in someone else's calendar. I was speaking as myself. I wrote slowly, "Dear Helen, you were never asking for too much. You were simply surrounded by people who forgot how to say thank you, who mistook your steadiness for indifference, your silence for surrender, your giving for obligation. You held the roof up for decades, even when the beams cracked and the walls leaned. You loved without a ledger. You gave without pause. And when they turned their backs, you didn't chase them, not because you didn't care, but because you finally understood your own worth. That understanding wasn't a moment. It was a slow birth, one ache at a time, one missed call at a time, one birthday spent alone. And when the last thread snapped, the house, the papers, the decision made without your voice, you didn't explode. You folded. Then you began again. I stopped writing to catch my breath. Outside, a single leaf floated down to the porch, gold, crisp, whole. I remember watching it fall with such stillness in my body, as if it mirrored everything I'd let go of. I dipped the pen again and continued. You have carried love, real love, through grief, through silence, through sacrifice. You held David's hand when his voice was failing. You stayed awake through nights of worry no one ever saw. You made life beautiful not with riches or grandeur, but with simple things, warm meals, handwritten notes, stitched hems, remembered favorites. Even when they stopped seeing you, you never disappeared. You just waited for the right time to return to yourself. And now, here you are. No fanfare, no applause, just peace. I folded the letter gently, pressed it flat with my palm, and slid it into an old envelope I'd saved from a birthday card years ago. I didn't address it. I didn't seal it. I tucked it into the drawer with the journal. That night, I lit a candle, a small one, scented like cedar and orange. I sat in the rocker by the window and let the flame flicker while I read a passage from a book I'd once underlined but never really understood. Something about forgiveness not needing an audience. And I realized something. I had forgiven them, not out loud, not to their faces, but in the most honest way a person can. By no longer waiting for them to change. I no longer needed Aaron to call with tenderness. I no longer needed Olivia to see me without an agenda. I no longer needed my name to be spoken at their tables, because I had spoken it here, in this room, with this letter. And that was enough. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about unhooking myself from the life I kept trying to prove I deserved. That it was about loosening the grip on stories. I thought I had to keep writing and choosing instead to write new ones, even if no one else would read them. The next morning, I took the letter out again and read it once more. Then I walked out to the back porch, lit a match, and held the envelope to the flame. It burned quickly. Not with drama, not with ceremony, just soft and final. The ash scattered across the lavender I had planted in spring. The wind carried the rest down the hill toward the woods. I didn't feel lighter. I felt real. There's a difference. Later that day, Ruth from painting class stopped by with extra peaches. She didn't ask questions, just handed them to me with a crooked smile and a thought you might want something sweet. We sat on the porch and peeled them in silence. I thought about telling her about the house, the letter, the way everything had changed, but I didn't, because some stories aren't meant for retelling. They're meant for finishing, and that letter, it wasn't for closure, it was for opening, for reminding myself that my story, though quieter now, was still unfolding, still worth living, still entirely mine. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned that soft apricot hue, I remembered something David once told me during a storm, years ago, when the power had gone out and the candles were the only thing lighting the room. Sometimes the quiet tells you what the noise never could. And now, finally, I understood what he meant. It had taken me a lifetime to hear it, but I had. and in the soft crackle of a letter burning, in the sweet juice of fresh peaches, in the silence between heartbeats, I had come back to myself. I wake up before the sun, most mornings now, not because I have to, but because I want to. There's something about those first few minutes of soft light, the quiet rustle of trees just beginning to stir, that fills a space in me I didn't know was still empty. The kettle sings gently, never rushing. I pour my tea into the same old mug I've had for 20 years, a chipped, hand-painted one David picked up at a flea market because he thought the bluebirds looked like me. It's funny what stays with you. I sit on the porch with that mug and a blanket across my knees. Watch the fog lift from the hills like steam from a wound that's finally healing. The earth exhales. So do I. My life now is not exciting. It's not the kind of thing you post about or write updates for. No one's keeping track of what I planted in the garden this week or whether I rearranged the living room furniture for the third time in a month. But it's mine. That alone makes it extraordinary. Some days I walk into town, stop by the market, pick up honey, some eggs, a new jar of jam just because the label makes me smile. Ruth sometimes joins me. We don't talk much on those walks. We don't need to. There's a knowing that comes with time, a quiet agreement between women who have carried things too long and are finally learning how to put them down. I've started journaling more often again. Not every day, but when something moves me, a scent, a sound, a memory that bubbles up without warning. I don't write for anyone else. There's a strange freedom in knowing no one will read it. It lets me tell the truth. I've written about the pain, the ache of being left out, the betrayal tucked beneath the words we were just trying to help. But I've also written about the peace I never expected, about the evenings that stretch out like fabric, soft and unhurt, about the joy of cooking a meal for no one but myself and lighting a candle anyway. There's rosemary in the garden now. And thyme. I planted them in April, and they've taken well to the soil. I like running my hands through them in the morning, the way the scent clings to my fingers, earthy and honest. I always keep a bowl of fruit on the table, not because I expect guests, but because I like the way it looks full, colorful, and a small kind of abundance. For years, I did things for the sake of others. Now, I do them because they bring me pleasure. That shift may seem small, but it has changed everything, Olivia writes from time to time. Letters now, not texts. I think the slowness of writing by hand has softened her voice. There's something gentler in her words. Less assumption, more reaching. She tells me about the kids, her work, little things she thinks I might smile at. I read them. Sometimes I write back, sometimes I don't. Aaron called once, a month ago. I let it go to voicemail. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Tired, maybe not from work, maybe from finally feeling the stretch of the gap between us. He didn't ask for much, just said he was thinking of me, that he hoped I was well, that if I ever wanted to talk, he was ready to listen. I haven't called back, not out of bitterness, just because I'm not ready to speak that chapter aloud yet, and maybe I never will. It's enough for now to know that they feel my absence, that they have begun to understand that I was never just a mother or a wife or a helper in their story. I was a person, with wants, with boundaries, with a soul. And that soul is quiet now, not empty, not bitter, just still. The days unfold softly. I read, I paint, I take long baths in the evening, sometimes by candlelight, just because I can. I keep the radio low classical, mostly though sometimes I let it surprise me. A bit of jazz, or an old folk song I used to hum while folding laundry. There's no rush to anything. Time moves how it wants here. I watch the birds more. They've started nesting near the edge of the roof. There's a mother robin who hops along the railing every morning, as if checking on me. I nod to her. We both understand what it means to care too deeply for others who may never return the favor. I don't know what the future holds. I don't think about it much anymore. That used to be my job, planning for everyone, anticipating needs, bracing for storms no one else saw coming. Now, I trust the seasons. I trust the soil. I trust myself. And that's more than I've trusted in years. Sometimes I imagine what they'd say if they saw me now. If they sat on this porch and watched me knit, or trim the lavender, or sip tea in silence, would they recognize me? Would they see the woman who had been beneath the one they relied on? Or would they still only see what I used to give? It doesn't matter anymore. I'm not trying to be understood. I'm just trying to live honestly. There's a wooden bench beneath the oak tree out back. I sit there often in the late afternoon. The sun dips low, casting everything in gold. It's my favorite time of day. That sometimes I bring my journal. Sometimes I bring nothing at all, just myself. And in that space, in that golden light, I feel the fullest I've ever been. Not because everything is perfect, not because the pain is gone, but because I am no longer waiting to be loved the way I gave it. I have let go of the story where I am only enough when I am needed. Now, I am simply enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty. And that was beautiful.